earlier on, where people lived side by side, not in peace, not in democracy, but under colonial powers. And the colonists were expelled across the Middle East, across India and the subcontinent, and nationalist movements expelled them, and very often they set about trying then to create some idea of the nation state they were going to build. And all over the Middle East were built Arab states, Arab Muslim states. And all over India and Pakistan, the civic nationalism of Gandhi and his party was defeated. Gandhi was shot, and ethnic nationalism took over, and there were huge forced movements of people. All over Europe, Yugoslavia, Eastern Europe, the Soviet Union, following the First World War, following 1989. These are very, very common disasters, right? What we need to do is find our way through them. Step back, instead of just telling emotive stories about this or this particularity and then saying we mustn't be emotive, and if you're emotive you should go on the couch, to which I object. I think there are a lot of people in this room whose grandparents were refugees, and I don't at all take to being told that I should sit on a couch by somebody with a very kind of jolly, sensible, English, analytical attitude, who's actually not being analytical at all, who's giving you details, but not the big picture. And the big picture is that we need a politics of peace and reconciliation between Israel and Palestine. We don't need to denounce one side or the other as apartheid or Nazi or whatever. And as Jeremy Corbyn goes to visit Gaza, who are his hosts in Gaza? Who's looking after Jeremy when he's in Gaza? Right? Do we remember in the 1950s? Sorry?
Gerald Kaufman was with me at the time.
Yeah, Gerald Kaufman.
So Gerald Kaufman and myself were there.
Gerald Kaufman, the man who employs actually conspiracy theory against Israel. However, we remember in the 50s. Yeah, well, I'll find you the quote if you like. Israel's control of the Labour Party funding, I think you'll find. We remember in the 1950s kind of jolly good English parliamentarians going to East Germany and coming back and saying, oh yes, there's no unemployment here, and East Germany's really jolly wonderful. Jeremy gets hosted in Gaza by Hamas, by an anti-Semitic movement, right? By a movement which is murderous against Palestinian nationalists, right? Let's get real. Let's stop with this kind of po-faced English analysis, and let's talk about the big picture. And the big picture is that Israel and Palestine are very small places which ought to find a peace, and they ought not to be mobilised as symbolic of all our own angsts, right? And that's the problem. See, if you say Israel is the only apartheid state on the planet and every other state where there's legal racism or this or that isn't really apartheid, only Israel is apartheid, right? And what we have is the attempt to rebuild the apartheid movement against South Africa. We have the attempt to create Israel-Palestine as the key issue for all anti-racist activists across the planet, to do what was done at Durban, which was to pretend that Israel was the most serious manifestation of racism on the planet.
Sorry, we're running out of time a bit. We need to get on to floors.
I just want to say to us, let's get real, right? If we're going to talk about Israel-Palestine, let's do so. But let's not invest our whole universe in the symbolism of Palestinians as global victims and Israelis as global perpetrators.
Okay, so we're going to have about 3 or 4 questions from the floor, and then that's what we'll have to finish off, is to have answers to those questions. So I'll try and take one from all different sides of the room, from the back and the front. So first question, yes, have you?
I just thought, as part of sort of trying to contextualise this in the real, although I'm not sure if it would be considered too analytic or whatever, but basically my question is, given that many of the people in this room will consider their pressure on the UK government through their ability to vote in the general election as like the main pedestal for their political voice and their ability to make change in the world, what would speakers from each side suggest that we demand of our government in order to make peace more expedient? And then that'd be great.
Okay, another question. Yes. Yeah. Check shirt. That, yes, you.
Hiya. I just want to start by saying how disappointed I am at the pessimism of the pro-Palestinian representatives today about finding an eventual solution. The Muslims slaughtered in Christian crusades didn't see a solution, and the African slaves that were deported to America didn't see a solution. But the world changes, and they were eventually solved. And I'm sad that the pro-Palestinians can't see this. But the world didn't change because of the key politicians, and the world didn't change because of the big nations like America. It changed because of the individuals who make up those nations. And it will change, and the solution will be found in the individuals who make up Israel and Palestine. It will be made up of the people who go to work each day, people like you and me, the teachers and the doctors and the police of this world. In this country...
Sorry, does it have a question?
It does. It does.
We're running short on time, I'm sorry.
Because in this country we've taught our women equally to our men, and we gave them the ability to vote. And I'm so glad that we asked that question before, because it's all about the people.
What's your question, bro?
And so the question is, what needs to be done at a grassroots level? My question, I'd like to invite the three people on my right to ask what changes need to be made in the minds of the people themselves, and how that can be achieved faster.
Thank you. Do we have another question? So I've had someone from this side. Yes, at the back.
Right. Basically, it's been very interesting to me and whatnot, and it's a very sad situation, obviously. I mean, you've got like a kind of a religious element to the issue that seems really almost irreconcilable. You've also got like the problem of land. But one thing that's really sad that I've noticed tonight, and I'm not going to name names or whatever, but the issue here as well is that the language that's being allowed to be used to even have this discourse is being very one-sided, almost reflective of the way in which the military power and whatnot of one particular side is enforced on the other. Now, is it possible, right, to ever get over these issues, you know? If people are so scared of certain words that are perfectly fine in other situations, but for some reason, because of sensibility, are just not allowed to be used. Now, personally, I don't think there's a problem with using the word apartheid, because, you know, I mean, like, there are institutions that will happily call it that. Like, it's a shame, right, that certain people, that try and propagate this issue by just semantically distorting things. Robert Fisk, right, talks about how journalists, right, are put under an enormous amount of pressure that they cannot use certain words when reporting on...
Sorry, do you have a question at the end of this?
The question is are we ever going to overcome these problems when the language itself is being used to being distorted?
And one more question from this side over here. Yes, at the back there.
To my knowledge, Palestinians want East Jerusalem as their new capital. In a realistic peace negotiations, how valid is this prospect given understandable Israeli security concerns?
Okay, so which side did I go with last time? I can't actually remember. We'll start.
Can we have a question from a Palestinian?
Pardon?
Can we have a question from a Palestinian?
We don't really have time. We've got four on the table now, and to get them all answered, we'll need to have them answered now. Okay, so if we start from the right and then work to the left.
Let me skip for a minute. Go, you guys.
Okay, I'd like to begin with the grassroots question. In my first thing, I spoke about how peace could be achieved. I highlighted grassroots as a really important part. What we can see is that this is actually taking place in Israel and Palestine, and it's not as doom and gloom as everyone's saying, which is why I personally didn't want to get caught up in all of the rhetoric and going back and forth. What we can see happening in Israel, 2 weeks ago, 500 people met in Cinematic Square in Tel Aviv, members of the government from a variety of parties, to discuss ways to solve the conflict, to discuss the need for a two-state solution. What we also saw in June is thousands upon thousands of leaflets across all of the major Palestinian cities calling for a support of a Palestinian state based on 1967 lines, crucially based on 1967 lines, and for the Palestinian people to support and adopt a two-state solution. I think what we've seen from the Arab Spring and the Israel 10 protests over the summer is that people can make a real change. People power is really important. And I think that's the importance of grassroots, is that that's where a real peace can come from. And it's happening. And we can support it. In terms of what we can do with regards to the UK government, I think that when we look at the key issues, it's very much so still sovereignty for security, clouded in land for peace. We can expect the UK government to make sure that Israel does feel secure, so it can make the concessions needed. It can do this in a number of ways. It needs to invest heavily within Palestine itself. This is going on, especially in the West Bank. Currently, Palestinians are achieving growth yearly of 8%. This is largely due to Western investment, especially the EU and America, that the other side has said needs to back out. Actually, they're rather important in developing both sides. And things like this, positive initiatives. What was the fourth question? Sorry, the other question that was asked. With regards to East Jerusalem, I don't think it's too much to ask. I think when we look at Jerusalem today, it already is, to some extent, a divided capital, East and West. I think that imaginative methods will be taken to resolve issues over the holy sites. This has been put forward before a number of times. And I think that East Jerusalem will be part of the Palestinian capital. That's why I personally believe the solution will show.
Thank you. So basically, from this side, we go back and forth. So do we have anyone on this side?
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. On the questions raised, first one about elections, role of the UK government. The UK government has actually developed policy quite a lot in the region, and it has changed quite a lot under both the last Labour government and the current coalition government, and it's been more critical of Israel, particularly on the question of settlement policy. And I think personally that's a good thing. There's also been a significant amount of Department of International Development aid gone into both Gaza and the West Bank, and we seem to have got away from the strategy of pouring aid into the West Bank in order to starve Gaza. That appears now to have been abandoned altogether, which is a good thing. And I have to say that it's a bit depressing, you think, the amount of DFID aid that went into Gaza at various times and various projects that were built, all of which were destroyed during Operation Cast Lead, and now have to be rebuilt again. And so I think the British government needs to support the right of Palestinian recognition that's going through the UN. I think it's time to say that, and also to use the EU-Israel trade agreement, the human rights clauses within it concerning the numbers of Palestinian people that are held in Israeli prisons, and the treatment of Palestinian people by the presence of the settlements. And I don't think Israel should be allowed to continue having normal relations with the EU and normal trade policies when it does not adhere to the human rights clauses within the EU-Israel trade agreement. The second question, to answer the point about my visits to Gaza, I'd say the first time I went to Gaza I was invited in by the Gaza Mental Health Campaign. Other visits were through the British Embassy and Consulate who took me there. A third visit under the auspices of the United Nations, and the fourth visit I went as part of a Palestine Return Centre delegation. And just for the record, I met and made sure we met all parties that were represented in the elected parliament within Gaza whilst we were there. And so please understand that when I go on a delegation there, as indeed anybody else would, you make sure you meet every